Elizabeth II Charles, Prince of Wales Nicola Sturgeon John Swinney Kate Forbes Ken Macintosh Boris Johnson Rishi Sunak Alistair Jack The Scottish Parliament system. While a further 56 are returned from 8 additional member regions, each electing 7 MSPs. The most recent general election to the Parliament was held on 6 May 2021, with the Scottish National Party winning a plurality. The original Parliament of Scotland was the national legislature of the independent Kingdom of Scotland, and existed from the early 13th century until the Kingdom of Scotland merged with the Kingdom of England under the Acts of Union 1707 to form the Kingdom of Great Britain. As a consequence, both the Parliament of Scotland and the Parliament of England ceased to exist, and the Parliament of Great Britain, which sat at Westminster in London, was formed. Following a referendum in 1997, in which the Scottish electorate voted for devolution, the powers of the devolved legislature were specified by the Scotland Act 1998. The Act delineates the legislative competence of the Parliament, the areas in which it can make laws, by explicitly specifying powers that are reserved to the Parliament of the United Kingdom. The Scottish Parliament has the power to legislate in all areas that are not explicitly reserved to Westminster. The UK Parliament retains the ability to amend the terms of reference of the Scottish Parliament, and can extend or reduce the areas in which it can make laws. The first meeting of the new Parliament took place on 12 May 1999. The legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament has been amended numerous times since then, notably by the Scotland Act 2012, Scotland Act 2016, and United Kingdom Internal Market Act 2020. Some of the changes led to expansion of the Parliament's powers, especially over taxation and welfare. The United Kingdom Internal Market Act seeks to restrict the operation of devolved competences in certain areas. Its effect is to undermine the regulatory competence of the Parliament and diminish its authority, thus limiting its ability to make different economic or social choices to those made in Westminster. Before the Treaty of Union 1707 united the Kingdom of Scotland and the Kingdom of England into a new state called Great Britain, Scotland had an independent parliament known as the Parliament of Scotland. Initial Scottish proposals in the negotiation over the Union suggested a devolved parliament be retained in Scotland, but this was not accepted by the English negotiators. For the next 300 years, Scotland was directly governed by the Parliament of Great Britain and the subsequent Parliament of the United Kingdom, both seated at Westminster, and the lack of a Parliament of Scotland remained an important element in Scottish national identity. Suggestions for a devolved parliament were made before 1914, but were shelved due to the outbreak of the First World War. A sharp rise in nationalism in Scotland during the late 1960s fueled demands for some form of home rule or complete independence, and in 1969 prompted the incumbent Labour government of Harold Wilson to set up the Kilbrandon Commission to consider the British Constitution. One of the principal objectives of the Commission was to examine ways of enabling more self-government for Scotland within the unitary state of the United Kingdom. Kilbrandon published his report in 1973 recommending the establishment of a directly elected Scottish Assembly to legislate for the majority of domestic Scottish affairs. During this time, the discovery of oil in the North Sea and the following, It's Scotland's Oil campaign of the Scottish National Party resulted in rising support for Scottish independence, as well as the SNP. The party argued that the revenues from the oil were not benefiting Scotland as much as they should. The combined effect of these events led to Prime Minister Wilson committing his government to some form of devolved legislature in 1974. Under the terms of the Scotland Act 1978, an elected assembly would be set up in Edinburgh if the public approved it in a referendum be held. On 1 March 1979, a narrow majority of 51.6% to 48.4% voted in favour of a Scottish Assembly. But the Act also required that at least 40% of the total electorate vote in favour of the proposal. As the turnout was only 63.6%, The vote in favour represented only 32.9% of the eligible voting population. And the assembly was not established. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, demand for a Scottish parliament grew, in part because the government of the United Kingdom was controlled by the Conservative Party, while Scotland itself elected relatively few Conservative MPs. In the aftermath of the 1979 referendum defeat, the campaign for a Scottish Assembly was initiated as a pressure group, leading to the 1989 Scottish Constitutional Convention with various organisations such as Scottish churches, political parties and representatives of industry.